At St. Thomas Church in New York City, there is a crucifix that acts as a memorial to the victims of 9/11. And an inscription is there under that cross, words from a greeting that Queen Elizabeth had read to relatives of those victims. A simple quote: "Grief is the price we pay for love," it says. That line is actually part of a much longer quotation by a man named Dr. Colin Murray Parks, who's a psychiatrist at St. Christopher's Hospice in London. Let me read it to you. "The pain of grief is just as much a part of life as the joy of love. It is perhaps the price we pay for love, the cost of commitment. To ignore this fact, or to pretend that it is not so, is to put on emotional blinkers which leave us unprepared for the losses that will inevitably occur in our own lives and unprepared to help others cope with losses in theirs." Good Friday. Good Friday is a day in which the truth of that phrase, that grief is the price we pay for love, that truth is on full display. In these days, I don't know how it is for you, but it seems to me that the news is full of crucifixion today. Sometimes I wonder if the whole world isn't undergoing crucifixion. There's grief enough to go around and more. There's an abundance of grief in this world and much to grieve for. Not just the deaths of so many people from this pandemic, but the way our lives have been completely upended, the discontinuity of between now and the way things were not so long ago, the anxiety perhaps that some things will not return to what we now think of as normal. The new normal is upon us, and there's much to grieve. And grief is not all there is. The point of this day we call Good Friday, after all, God's Friday, is that God himself has entered grief. God has opened wide the door of death and chaos and destruction and entered into it himself. Christ has done battle with the forces of death and grief and alienation and chaos, and Christ has conquered. But we don't sidestep the grief that is a reality for us in this life, inevitably so. Grief is the price we pay for love. But that grief can be made endurable when we are sunk deep into the mystery of Christ's having gone there before us. We follow a Lord who has walked straight into the fearful reality of death and emerged by God's grace, by God's power, by the mystery at the heart of the universe that brings something out of nothing, that brings life out of death, that brings us out of non-being. God, in a word, who is our life and our hope. This Good Friday, if you're gripped by grief, if you're gripped by fear of what is happening in this world to us and around us and in us, if you are suffering in any of those ways, then I bring you some good news. You are not alone. God is right there in the midst of it with you. Christ is with you, holding you and keeping his arms of love and deathless life firmly around you. We glory in the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ because an instrument of shameful death and torture, grief beyond words, has become for us the sign of life. In holy baptism, we receive that sign. This day, and maybe in many days to come, let us make the sign of the cross with full intention to follow where Christ has gone before us and where he waits, even now, waits to welcome us home.